All right, what's up, guys? Wes Mitchell here, Chris Clark, Gamecock Central Live. Returning to action. Chris, you were on vacation last week. Almost, All right, what's up, guys? Almost did one Wes myself, here, Chris but Clark, it actually every time you go on vacation, things get super busy. It seems like stuff happens.
Oh yeah,
hit the vacay. So no live stream last week, but dude, we have plenty to talk about.
a lot.
This, now, obviously, if you've been watching or listening before, you know the drill. So we're going to give everybody a little bit of time to sort of get in the queue, get in line, and I've got to post these links on GamecockCentral.com and on Twitter, Facebook, all that good stuff. But while we're letting everybody get in, Chris, how was the vacay, man?
Oh, it was really good. Got to relax. Of course, as we predicted, some things did happen, but we knew that would happen. So I hope I didn't leave you hanging too much, you and young Colin Taylor. But it was good, man. Good to relax. Good to just get out like of Columbia for a little bit, just to be away. Got to hang out on the beach. It was a lot different than it typically is. We didn't really go out and do as much, but just getting some time away was nice. So here we are now, and we're ready to allegedly get back into sports at some point sometime soon.
Yeah, dude, it seems like as we've said for some time, we're going to try to play some football. So that's nice. I'm hopeful. I'm very hopeful that this isn't going to be another false start, so to speak. I feel I tell you, I haven't really followed it closely. But I feel for the high school guys right now, like the high school coaches, certainly the high school players, the media guys in the state who are following it like day by day, blow by blow. Because it has been tough, I think, on everybody because it's start, stop, and you think there's a date and then there's not. So I'm hopeful, we're expecting, we'll get into it in a second. We're expecting SEC schedule news, at some point fairly soon. And the ACC we saw put out their official schedule today, here on Thursday. So maybe, just maybe, we start to like settle into the idea of, all right, there's going to be some planned sports at least here for football in the not too distant future.
Yeah, and the high school league, to go back to the high school point, has pushed back the date. I guess it was an additional week as of yesterday, Wednesday, so that the first game for football is going to begin on September 25th now. So things have got pushed back, and their priority was get in, which this has been the priority, get in region games first, finish up with your non-region slate, play a 7-game schedule, then, get into the playoffs, and we're hopeful that things will get better. But, as we've talked about in the past, and high school and college have both gone in this direction of, there were some conversations certainly at various points about spring football, and it got to a point of, hey, we really don't know if spring's going to be any better. It's going to be very, very difficult financially, both for college and high school, to sustain, for that time period. And so it's just sort of go for it. So it's going to be very interesting, to see how those things are handled, because there's a lot of considerations, especially when you start talking about college ball. Then you get to a point where, you got the student body coming back. And so there are going to be some online classes, but there'll be a student population at large. There'll be opportunities to go out in the community. Will Muschamp touched on some of those things yesterday about how he's encouraged the players to sort of, I guess, button themselves up a little bit, bubble themselves up. And so, but yeah, football appears to be on the horizon. The SEC schedule at some point in the near future, maybe today, maybe tomorrow. Maybe it'll get pushed back again. It was intended to be released tomorrow, and that got pushed back because of the call that was held earlier in the day. But some clarity coming pretty soon for football.
Yeah, which is always nice. And it was interesting. Muschamp's always been a guy to sort of, I would say, focus in on phrases and repeating phrases to sort of, I would say, hone in on a particular focus or subject for his guys. And it seems like for this offseason and really this season itself, that live boring seems to sort of be the approach from the staff. And I think that was one of my takeaways yesterday from the press conference, which was an hour, which, by the way, is I think the longest on record Muschamp press conference at South Carolina. But live boring is basically, hey, I know you're a college kid. We know that there's a great social life at South Carolina and other places. And we know any other year, let's be honest, man. Yeah, they're football players. Yeah, they have a lot of responsibilities, but you're going to enjoy, college life. You're going to enjoy parties. You're going to enjoy hanging out with girls, stuff like that. But this is sort of like, this just ain't the year. And I think that's something they've tried to drive home. And, I was impressed, Chris, and I promise we're going to get down to some actual football stuff, but I was impressed, and I've been impressed. You and I have been told separately, off the record, how seriously Muschamp has taken the threat of coronavirus and the safety of his players. And, I've been impressed just with the fact that the protocols they have in place, moving the team meetings to bigger spaces. I mean, you got the offensive line is literally meeting in the indoor facility, one of the biggest open air or the biggest open air facility on campus. They've got name tags to sort of force people to spread out and social distance. And, the SEC obviously has their own protocols as well. But, I've been impressed just with the way Muschamp has handled the entire offseason as far as juggling the fact that you're a football coach, but you're now managing the safety and the lives of these 100 kids in the middle of a pandemic.
Yeah, and I think he's been hands off in the areas where it's probably good for a football coach to be hands off. I mean, it's like for us, Wes, if some one of our subscribers came to us with a tax question, we probably shouldn't answer it. I mean, no offense to you, unless you're also secretly a CPA behind the scenes. But so, but he's leaned on doctors. He's leaned on Clint Haggard, George Wynn as operations guy. He's mentioned that, and he's stuck to coaching football, talking to his players, talking to parents. We know from Muschamp's background and just what we've heard before he got to South Carolina, since he's been at South Carolina, he's regarded as a player's coach, has really good relationships with his, players' parents, and he's well liked in all those regards. So it's not a surprise to see how he's handled it, how he's, issued statements of support for Mark Fox and Jordan Rhodes, who are opting out. He didn't spend a lot of time on that. He kept those sort of things and the reasonings and all that private, which is probably the way it should be. But that's how he's regarded. And, Muschamp, to hit on what you said earlier too, briefly, you talked about how this is so different for the players, and it is difficult what they're asking them to do when they're college student athletes, to once in a lifetime experience. But Muschamp always talks about how South Carolina is a great fit for guys academically, athletically, socially, and spiritually. And really, the only one of those that you could say is normal, I guess, would be spiritually, but even not then, because some of these guys probably can't go to some of maybe even the things if they wanted to go, attend a church service or do something on campus with that. All those other things have been drastically altered, especially social life. I mean, football's been altered, academics with online classes or distancing classroom, masks, social aspect, all those things have been really altered. And so it's a difficult time, but one thing that he did mention was that the players and the coaches alike were really excited to just be able to get back to, to have something to look forward to in terms of the season.
Yeah, no, definitely, man. And I think, all right, so let's talk a little actual ball a little bit. Like I said, the longest press conference that, I can remember Muschamp having at South Carolina. And obviously there was a lot to get to. And this is going to be a very different year. But, I think there's plenty to be gleaned from this press conference that is actual football news and on the field stuff, as opposed to all the off the field, the protocols and all that stuff. So let's get into actual news, and obviously the big topic of conversation. You can tell that Muschamp has heard the what started as rumors and then the reporting on Luke Doty. Just by the way, when he was sort of doing his little roster rundown, he always does. He said, Luke Doty's still a quarterback, but he's going to play multiple positions this year. So Champ confirms what's already out there, what we had reported some of, what had, sort of been put out there initially on Twitter. And Luke Doty is going to play some other positions. We know that's going to be receiver is going to be one of those positions. This is actually something that has been in the works for some time now. It's not something where he's just slid over there in the past week or so. He's been working a lot, sort of off the field, quote, on his own, not on team time, so to speak, running routes, catching the ball from one of the other quarterbacks, and really just trying to, I would say, get that muscle memory back, because the fact is this kid played receiver as a sophomore in high school and was very, very good at that position. So, and by the way, if they're on here, and I got to check the chat, I've been getting our links ready. If they're on here, we did have a question, Chris. That's probably been 3 weeks ago by now, about Luke playing receiver, and we sort of dismissed it at the time. But obviously our watcher, listener, subscriber there that was talking about that was onto something, because it appears the staff is looking for a way to get Luke Doty onto the field. He is easily one of the fastest guys, most athletic guys. We had reported back in, that was probably January or February, that Luke was running with the skill guys. So in your workouts, basically your conditioning, you have 3 categories. You have like skill guys on one end of the spectrum. You have big guys that are like O-line and D-line on the complete other. And in the middle, you'll have like tight ends, I guess linebackers, quarterbacks, stuff like that, where it's divided up by how you generally would sort of match up athletically from a speed standpoint. Well, we had reported Luke has been running and conditioning with the skill group as opposed to the middle group really since about the day he arrived on campus, which gives you a little idea of what type of athleticism he has. He may actually straight line be the second fastest receiver on the team in that group, I think, maybe behind Shi Smith, or at least in that conversation. So as we've gathered more information on this, as Muschamp has talked about it, I think it does make a lot of sense, and you can see what they're trying to get at a position that, I mean, dude, we've talked about the receiver position until we're blue in the face this offseason. So we know that position is a concern.
Yeah, I mean, it's a deal where, if South Carolina was, too deep at every receiver position with guys just loaded with proven experience, then maybe this is more of a blip on the radar. Maybe it's something that doesn't even happen, really. Maybe it might still happen, but they're in the position of, let's find some guys that can help us. And the exact way that Muschamp described it, I mean, finding your best guys, figuring out who are our most athletic guys. And so as those OTAs, we talked about this a few weeks ago, but as those OTAs progressed, as you get through the workouts and all those types of things, the staff, they already knew that Luke Doty was really athletic, and they knew when they were recruiting him that he was, from a skill set standpoint, there's no doubt he had the physical attributes to do a bunch of different things for you, including quarterback, which is still his long-term position. But, just taking another look at it, they just said, we should try this guy at receiver in some situations, because they need help at receiver. I mean, it's something, like you said, Wes, we've documented it a lot. And so when you can give, a position that carries plenty of question marks going into 2020, when you can give it an influx of, an infusion of talent, speed, and competitiveness, that's something you should do. Colin Hill and Ryan Helinski appear to be, ahead in the quarterback battle because they have college experience, because they, played the position in spring ball as well. And Luke was on campus at that time as well. It just makes a lot of sense to try to do it. And I think it'll be really interesting to see, what plays out and how much noise he can make there.
Yeah, I'm curious to see it as well. All right, guys. So let's, of course, as always, we want to take your questions. I only have one chatter so far. Cornbread, Corn Fed is our first poster here. Yeah, what's up, man? Appreciate you joining us. As always, y'all can throw your questions into the little chat window, and we'll try our best to get to them and try our best to get you a good answer there. But I think, Chris, if you, based on everything that I've heard going into this year, and then I think it was kind of backed up by what Muschamp said when he was talking about receivers yesterday. Shi Smith, we know he's going to be counted on to be the number one. They sort of, I would say, you go as far as to say they've sort of challenged him a little bit, to step up and take that number one spot. Then, something we had said on the Insiders Forum is that Xavier Legette is sort of going to be counted on. And we may be having a little technical difficulty here, guys. So if it's messing up on you, hang tight. Chris, can you still hear me?
I can still hear you, and my screen still says that we're live, but that's just mine.
All right. We're going to keep rolling then. But yeah, so just in case I'm messed up on my end, Chris, why don't you weigh in a little bit on that receiver position from a big picture? Because it sounds like past Shi, they're counting on Xavier Legette. They're hoping to get something from Dacarrion Joyner. Something we had said as well, Rico Powers is going to have a chance to help as a freshman. But really, it sounded to me like there were some sort of comments from Muschamp, if you want to really read into it, where I think he was sort of saying, almost challenging some guys by not mentioning their names and saying some other guys need to step up, in practice and fall camp, I think.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, anything you could do there to just increase your competition level. I mean, there were a few guys that he didn't mention that maybe you would expect to hear. And there might be some different reasons for that, including maybe a little bit of motivation. But, I think it was also a chance to highlight, some guys that had done some good things for him. And Rico Powers, Wes, to credit you, was one that you mentioned in a recent report as having made a lot of noise. I think out of the receiver class that South Carolina signed, that's been a common question from the people that read our site and subscribe on the Insiders Forum. We got that question a ton. Which of these guys can help early, whether it's Mike Wyman or Rico Powers or Jakari Caldwell? And, we started hearing recently a lot more even about Rico Powers. And we knew that he was athletically, he was a really talented kid coming out of high school out of Georgia. But you reported that, and Muschamp backed that up, at the press conference, and that he was a guy who could finish on the top end and was going to help this year. And so, look, we knew going into this season, aside from Shi Smith, a lot of question marks, whether it's guys that have had a lot of injury history, whether it was guys that, just haven't done as much, have been inconsistent. We knew that some guys were either going to have to step up, and guys that were already on the roster would have to step up, even if it's a guy like Drake Davis, who's obviously had that injury history. It'll be a senior this year, whether it's a guy like Ortre Smith, who did some good things as a true freshman and then had to step up, or whether it's some incoming freshmen. So a lot of room there, to continue to improve that position. And certainly wherever you can find that help, whether it's current roster members, whether it's moving some guys to Dacarrion Joyner, of course, has had to split some time last year because of the injury situation, both at receiver and at quarterback. He split some time there. But you see moving Luke Doty there. You see certainly placing an emphasis on finding some freshmen that can help. Guys, it looks like, just to give you an update for those of you still on, that Wes was somehow kicked off of our live stream. And so I'm going to try to bring him back in. And if we can get him back in, then we certainly are going to do that. I just sent him another invite. We run our YouTube lives, of course, through Zoom, so that Wes and I can just talk to each other through that. And give me 1 second to send him a message, just to let him know that I resent him an invite. So yeah, let me get my YouTube up as well here on Gamecock Central's YouTube channel, so that I can check things out and see if we've got any comments rolling out, so that I'll be glad to answer that. Susan Hitchcock, hey, how are you? See that you have dropped us a comment here
Hello,
on our
everyone.
channel, and I really appreciate that. All right, Wes, I think is coming back. Let me see.
Hey,
We got him. Hey, I kept it going. I didn't screw it up too bad.
hey, that's good. Man, live. I was about to say live radio, live whatever we're doing, live streaming, live videoing. Never a dull moment, huh?
That's right. Yeah, I was just rolling through the rest of, giving some more thoughts on receivers, talking about how I was trying to get you back on here, and shouting out our friend Susan Hitchcock on the live chat. And so that's where we are.
So we're still rolling along. That's good. All right, so y'all hit us with your questions there. We obviously want to hear from you. That's the beauty of the live stream. When it works correctly. But I'm impressed by Zoom because my computer literally just shut down, blue screen of death, and it kept on rolling. So that's good to know for the future. Okay, let's get into some other things. Chris, as far as the Muschamp presser, was there anything else that maybe caught your attention just from a football standpoint that was a surprise, or maybe just confirmed something that we have been talking about, or just, caught your eye above all else, maybe?
I think two things football related. And I might come up with some other ones even after that. But, so three. One is he talked a lot about the freshmen, right? About how impressed he was with those guys. He went through the defensive line with Makia Scott, Huntley, Tonka Hemingway, who he said was working at defensive end. I thought was interesting. He said he's 270.
Hey, by the way, Chris, real quick, let me cut you off.
Yeah.
Completely random, but I actually ran into Tonka Hemingway getting pizza last week, and the dude definitely looks more like a defensive end right now. I know he's one we've talked about who's sort of played at various weights, and he played basketball, he played baseball, hadn't really been able to focus on football. Long term, could he be a defensive tackle? Yes, he's up to 270 pounds, but just looking at him, just a very, I don't think because that has like a negative connotation. He looked to be he was very in shape, I should say, and definitely profiled more as someone that looked like a defensive end, I would say, than a defensive tackle. So that part, I guess, wasn't really a huge surprise for me, but I think we now have an idea of sort of where the freshmen, at least for this season, sort of slot along that defensive front. So anyway, continue.
Yeah, and I thought that was interesting, that note, and glad you could lend some color to it. So I was curious about where he was weight standpoint. I hadn't heard lately, and where they were going to slot him for at least the short term. And so that was interesting. And Birch and Gilbert Edmond, of course, at Buck, and Huntley, a defensive tackle, Makia Scott. But he talked up the freshman class in general. They seem really happy with it at all positions. Another couple things is, just the quarterback battle. He mentioned that all the guys have done some good things, but he was asked about Colin Hill and Ryan Helinski because, of course, there's been a lot going around about that lately. And he said, hey, it's good competition. And so didn't expect that he was going to say, oh, yeah, it's this guy or that guy. I expected him to say we got a good competition, but, just continuing to sort of reaffirm that I thought was interesting. And also the offensive line, obviously with the news that Jordan Rhodes was opting out, I think anybody that follows the program closely could have said, okay, well, that clears up one question, because if there was a question about Javon Gwynn, what you do with him, whether it's those two guys battling it out at right guard, or do you look at Gwynn at center? But that probably makes Gwynn your right guard, and he said that. So Justin Turnitine, which we heard a lot of good returns about. Muschamp said before he has a chance to be the left tackle. He mentioned that again, yesterday. And then he mentioned how Ja'Kai Moore and Jalen Nichols are a couple guys that could play tackle, but also might be able to slot inside. And threw in Eric Douglas there, first name out of his mouth, if I'm not mistaken, at the center position, which is something we've talked about on the show and reported as well. So nothing earth-shattering, or super surprising, but just a few confirmations and just items that he mentioned there that I thought were at least noteworthy.
Yeah, man, and I think you look, and if you sort of follow the program this offseason and then the stuff he had to say yesterday, it all kind of matched up, with what we've been hearing. I think the two guys opting out, frankly, wasn't something we had heard, but otherwise, most of it sort of matched up. Jamar Brown playing some safety while playing dime linebacker was probably a little bit of a surprise for me. Just not something we had heard much of, but makes sense given his athleticism and coverage ability. He's probably the best coverage linebacker on the team. There's obviously some question marks at safety with the depth there. So I think giving that a shot makes some sense. So, we'll see how those things play out. All right, we can go back to get to that, but we do have a few questions here. Susan Hitchcock weighing in with us here about the new running back commit. That is something we wanted to hit on as well anyway. And, of course, South Carolina adding a pledge from Ontario Brown yesterday, the second running back commitment of the class, and that essentially puts them at a position where they've now met their quota, if you will. They wanted to sign 2 running backs. They now have 2 of them committed for the class of 2021, which means, and I think, Chris, you always sort of, even if you meet your need there, you always sort of keep recruiting other guys in the class. I think worth noting, just in case type deal. So that doesn't mean I think you completely shut down 2021, but for the most part, once you meet your quota there, kind of gives you an opportunity to go ahead and start looking to 2022. And I think we've seen, like Eric Wolford, for example, a lot of years he has his current class knocked out, other than maybe a guy or two fairly early, and then focuses ahead on the new class. So I think that's an opportunity for South Carolina to do that there now. But, let's talk about Brown for a second, a kid that has a good film. He's a touchdown scorer. That's something that Des Kitchings mentioned in his very first press conference. He wants guys that have a nose for the end zone. Makes plays, explosive kid, can run, actually difficult to tackle. I think he's got a strong lower body, good balance. And one thing that was my takeaway, Chris, from all of this that sort of came up several times, this is just a kid you want on your team. I think that's something that was very valuable for South Carolina as far as what they saw in Ontario Brown, is that this is a kid that's a leader. He's been through a lot in his life as far as a loss. His mother passed away 4 years ago, and one of his best friends passed away earlier this summer. Just a very driven kid, a kid that plays with a purpose and extremely hard worker. And I think if you're going to build out your roster, then you need to add guys like this to your team. So there's, I think, reasons that you like Ontario Brown's pickup that go beyond just him as a player.
Yeah, for sure. And man, when this is one of those kids that I think probably, now running backs are a little bit different in camp settings. It's just a different type of position than quarterback, receiver, even lineman. In that sometimes it's a little bit tough to get a read on a guy in camp or see a guy explode after camp. But I really get the sense that he would have been one, that if he could have gone to a bunch of college camps this summer, again, there were no on-campus college camps this summer. And it's really hurt some guys in terms of picking up scholarships where, whether it's schools don't have, the proper sort of evaluation tools. Maybe they're reaching on some guys. Maybe they're just going with their board that they carried already. There's always, in a typical cycle, situations where guys can, draw additional looks, where it's private camp circuit. There haven't been as many of those this year either, or college camps. But there have been one that came off to mind off the top of my head was Lynn J. Dixon, who went to Clemson. I remember he went to a Rivals camp series, which is obviously a private camp, not on campus, but he went there, I guess that was 2 or 3 cycles ago, and one summer, and just put in a standout performance and picked up a bunch of offers, ended up blowing up. So I feel like Ontario would have picked up a lot of those, and really would have had a lot more options, because again, that's the question we always get, the offer list. But you watch this kid play, man. He's got size. He can run through contact. He can make people miss. There's just a lot to like. And Chad Simmons on the Rivals.com network had him at his MVP camp. What was that, last summer, Wes? And
I think that was early this year.
Early this year. Yeah, that's right, because they still did have some MVP camps.
Yeah,
and really
before
like the
everything got
kid.
shut down.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to like when you watch this kid
Hey,
on
watch
film.
this catch.
Yeah.
Woo. Over the shoulder, Willie Mays. But yeah, man, I think Chad had him in. I think that was like January, and Chad. To me, Chris, Chad does as good a job covering a state as anybody I've ever met.
Hmm.
Um, and I talked to Chad about him, and he said, "Look, this program, nothing against Beach High at all. This program, it's down in the Savannah area. Chad's been covering Georgia for like a decade, and they haven't really had a player like this that was an FBS guy. So, if you're in Atlanta, every school in the country recruits Atlanta, and they fly in for a few days and they hit as many high schools as they possibly can all in a couple of days. But much like South Carolina, there's still these smaller areas where you just have to really canvass the state and put in the hours, the driving hours, if you're going to find guys like this. And, he's a kid, like you said, showed up at that MVP camp. He won the running back MVP award. And Chad instantly said, he's an FBS guy. Make him a 3-star. Definitely want to see more of him, right? So, well, there was no spring practice in Georgia because of Corona. So that opportunity has not been there yet to see him in person, in pads, against, real live opponents, in a game setting. So is he a kid that could possibly pick up offers or a better ranking down the road? I would say absolutely. Once you get a chance, he's one that, depending on the schedule and what happens, I want to get down to Savannah and watch him myself, Chris, because I'm very intrigued by him. And I think, and again, I know people get tired of us talking, they say we make excuses for why kids aren't more highly rated. I get it. We maybe do sound like a broken record, but this is a case where literally, at least from an evaluation standpoint, I'm not saying he's going to definitely move up to a 4-star guy. It's just that it's an incomplete evaluation because there hasn't been an opportunity for rivals. I'm assuming the other guys that rank players as well to get out and actually watch him in a game setting. So he will be one to track this fall when there's hopefully some high school ball.
Yeah, I mean, no doubt about it. And he actually, man, we'll have to look at their schedule. It looks like they played May River from South Carolina last year.
They did. Yep.
Uh,
When the first time I ever talked to Ontario, I asked him if he'd ever been to South Carolina. And he was like, no. And he was like, wait a second. He's like, I have been to the state, and it was because of that game. Now, before committing, he actually went and he rode up to Columbia. He can't take an actual visit, but he rode up to Columbia to check out the school himself, check out the city, all that stuff. But yeah, prior to that, the only time he'd really ever even been in the state was when they played May River.
Yeah. Well, and the other thing, man, is, Beach wasn't able to, they actually didn't get to participate in the playoffs last year. They made it, but they had, this dispute that I don't know all the ins and outs of it, but, they were actually ineligible to even participate in the playoffs. So that's another time where, that happens too, man. We've covered the Georgia, football playoffs for the state championships. And every year there's a kid that, sometimes it's somebody everybody already knows about, but there's always, sort of this group of standout performers. And because Georgia high school football is pretty big, it's a big event. And, there's always somebody who really stands out. So that would have been another opportunity for him to really sort of show his stuff in the playoffs. So, yeah, really intrigued by this kid and really interested to see, if things are, normal and everything this season, to see what he does.
Well, I'll say this, man. Also, the timing, and he catches the ball pretty well too, Chris. If you're watching this here, they get him involved in the passing game. The timing of it, Des Kitchings got to South Carolina, and I think I went back and looked. It was like within 2 weeks he had offered this kid, and South Carolina, instantly prioritized him. And he was one of, I remember at the time, we were listing probably, if you include Caleb McDowell as well, probably 4 to 5 running backs that we felt was the best chance that South Carolina would have 2 of the 5 in their class. And he was one of those 5 guys. So, if you go back and look, just the timing, I think when Des Kitchings got here, we went back and looked at his recruiting at NC State and how not just some of the high profile guys he had landed, but how even some of the more underrated guys he's landed have worked out. And, to me, I always look at sort of the timing of those things. When you offer a guy pretty instantly and prioritize him, generally that means you're really high on him. And the fact that South Carolina didn't technically have to take another back in this class, right? From a number standpoint, you could have gotten away with just taking one in this class, but the fact they still wanted to take a second because they wanted it to be him, to me, is a clear sign that they are very sold on this kid.
Yeah, because it definitely, and I think it's reflected in how we reported this, based on what we heard. It was never a situation of, we got to take 2 backs this year. It was never that, because like you said, they had 3, 2 high, it's a little different because they had 2 high school guys and a JUCO guy in the last class, but they had one committed in McDowell, and he's a little bit of a different type of back. But even with all that, it was never 2 backs. Got to have 2 backs, and then you just take a couple guys and then you assess it. And this time, in this situation, you can look at it through the lens of, hey, this is a kid that, if they didn't get him, they might have just stood pat. They might have just kept Caleb McDowell in the class and roll with what they had. So I think that's sort of telling in terms of what they thought of the kid. And then, like you said, man, it's a situation where, Des Kitchings does have a nice track record with guys, developing guys, whether it was, obviously at NC State for a while, but he also had Zach Stacy and Warren Norman, at Vanderbilt as well, and did a really nice job with those guys.
And that's a perfect segue, I would say, to our next question from Frederick Cooper. Chris wants to know, is the running back position becoming a strength of the team? And, I thought it was kind of funny yesterday, Chris, when Muschamp was talking about the running backs. He almost sort of slowed the roll a little bit, so to speak. Like I can't remember exactly how he said it, but he talked the guys up, and then he was like, hold on. He's basically like, let's watch these guys before we crown them type thing. And I think it is, we do sometimes, I won't say get carried away, but we have talked up Marshawn Lloyd a lot.
Yeah.
And I do think Marshawn Lloyd is going to be your starter. I think if you look at this position, the sense I get coming from within the program, if you were sitting down and having a beer with these guys and they were talking honestly with you, not talking in a press conference, I think South Carolina across the board is probably pretty excited about the running back room. Not many teams lose their, 3 of their top guys from last year and just fail to miss a beat at all. And honestly, possibly are maybe in better shape. I think talent-wise, they certainly are. No offense to those other guys. But you look, man, I think this is playing out to where they have some playmakers. They have some depth. They have some different skill sets. And given everything we talked about at the receiver position, Chris, they're going to need these running backs to play well, and they're going to have to lean on these running backs at times. So, yeah, I would say obviously from a production standpoint, you can't say they're a strength if you are one of those people that comes at it from a what have you done on the field standpoint. So we don't want to go that far. But I would say if we're talking about potential, the talent, and even projection, I would go as far as to say I think this unit is going to perform as one of the better units on the team this year if we're going to make a prediction, because I think there's talent, there's depth, and there's a variety of skill sets.
Yeah, and that is the really the biggest question. I don't think talent's as much in question. I don't look at that group and say, man, I just don't see a lot of guys there. because you see Marshawn Lloyd, who's one of the top backs in the country, and everything we've heard has backed that up, from when he stepped on campus. Has he played in a live game? No, he hasn't. Okay, but just based on some of the things that he did in the limited spring practices, how he's worked out, how he looked in OTAs, I mean, all those different things. And then Zaquandre White's a guy that FSU signed as a running back out of high school. He had a good career at junior college as well. Fenwick and Harris have a little bit of college experience and have done some good things at different times. And then Rashad Amos is another guy that we like, and that we've heard good things about. So I do think you're making more of a projection, whereas, you go into last season, you have Rico Dowdle, and the question is, if he can stay healthy, then we know he's talented. Tavian Feaster, we know he's talented. AJ Turner can do some good things. Mon Denson can help you. You lose all those guys. So then the bigger question is, it's not even talent because of who you have waiting in the wings to replace those guys. It's just sort of experience. So it's pass blocking and just scheme and all these different things that running backs have to make an adjustment to as freshmen or first year players. So the talent, for me, just to sum it up, not really in question. Hey, let me jump off that real quick related to running backs, because I mentioned Zach Stacy and Warren Norman earlier. I did want to give a shout out on this. Those guys are both in the same class at Vandy. And I know Vandy, Vandy was actually pretty good under James Franklin, but, Zach and Warren were really good players. Zach Stacy was named a SEC legend. He's the all-time leading rusher at Vandy and is the only back in Vandy history to produce back-to-back 1,000-yard seasons. But Warren Norman was the SEC Freshman of the Year in 2009. And those are both mid 3-star guys that Des Kitchings recruited to Vandy. So, like you said, Wes, he's got a pretty good eye for talent at the running back position. And his guys have typically been really productive at the college level too. So that's why when I look at guys like, Ontario Brown, or even a guy that, he inherited, the group from last year, but Rashad Amos, for example, who wasn't a super highly recruited guy, I think he sort of knows, how to evaluate guys and then can help mold them and get them better and maximize their skill sets.
Yeah. And, Vandy, it seems like Vandy has a little history of getting those guys at running back, that aren't quite highly recruited necessarily, but then go over there and perform, pretty well. Question there about Bobo and whether he coaches from the box or the field as a coordinator. I would lean heavily. I haven't really asked someone this. I would lean heavily towards him being in the box. I know in the past he's been in the box. Obviously when he was a head coach, still coordinating the offense to an extent, he was on the field at Colorado State. But everything I've seen, old videos and stuff, and what I remember, Chris, he was always in the box at Georgia.
Yeah. We have not heard. That's a good question that we should try to ask, but that's what he's typically done. And I would think that's probably the direction that they'll go as well.
All right. So a question from Shane Oliver here. I'm going to shoot this one over to you first, Chris. In your opinion, will the offensive line be a strong point of the team this year, or we can run the football with purpose?
Yeah, so, I'm always intrigued by the O-line questions, and I think they're very fair. It's a complex issue. I think a lot of people, and I know this isn't this exact question, but a lot of times we get the question of, is the offensive line going to be dominant? My answer to that is no, because I don't think any offensive line is going to be dominant hardly. There are very, very few. And even then, it's hard for any offensive line that's going to play in this conference against this schedule, which is going to have 4, probably 5 top 15 teams that they play. And I think that's without Clemson on the schedule. It's going to be really hard to be dominant. And Muschamp describes it pretty well. In the SEC, with these very talented defensive fronts that you face, you're not going to block everybody every play. And so your offensive line is you try to get a hat on a hat, but at some point your running back play, you have to be able to make a guy miss or run through a guy. Those offensive lines that Marcus Lattimore, for example, played with, they had some talented dudes. But Marcus Lattimore made a lot happen on his own. He turned a lot of no-yard gains into 2 or 3. He turned a lot of 2-yard gains into 12, And so your rushing stats and your offensive line as a whole it's going to look a lot better with really good running back play. So they go hand in hand. So I think the big question is, can they be consistent? Because what we saw last year, we saw some times where South Carolina's offensive line held up quite well in the pass game and the run game. But then later in the year, and part of this had to do, again, working hand in hand. The offense wasn't explosive at all. They had a lot of running back injuries, quarterback injuries, wide receiver play, wide receiver injuries. They just didn't. It was so inconsistent. But when I look at the positional strengths on the team, Wes, and you tell me what's the strongest, unit on the offense, I probably do go O-line, because receiver, I still have questions. Running back, I like the talent, but they haven't proven it yet. Tight end, talent, but again, sort of unproven, got to build some depth. Quarterback, you feel pretty good about, but we still don't know for sure who the starter is. So I lean towards the O-line because they have a nice blend of experience and talent. There's some future, I think, NFL guys on that group, and they got some guys that have played, and they have a little bit of depth. You're not going in saying, there's only 5 guys, or there's not even 5, so that's how I would answer that. I think it's really complex when you look at sort of that offensive line picture, but I do think it can be a good group this year, but the rest of the offense has to help them out as well.
Yeah. So, by the way, while we have everybody, Chris, we do have a new deal going right now, 60 days free for new Gamecock Central subscribers. So if you have not tried us out, we certainly want you to try us out. And we'll, if you go to our front page, GamecockCentral.com, it is the lead story right now. And we want as many subscribers as we possibly can as we get into this football season. We'll, of course, have football coverage, recruiting coverage as always. Then we'll get into basketball and baseball down the line with Colin Taylor, who does a great job with that stuff as well. And so, yeah, if you're on our YouTube page, we want you to hit the subscribe button on here as well. That's right there at the bottom right of your screen. That part's free. And now, if you're not a subscriber already, you can try our great content on Gamecock Central for free for 60 days as well. So just go to the front page and hit that up. All right, so Susan wants to know if we can say something about Jalen Brooks, the wide receiver transfer, because she is disappointed in some of the comments about him that were made. Yeah, and I think here's the thing, man, with Jalen Brooks, this goes right back to what we talked about with receivers already. There is a need for some guys who can get open and make some plays at that position. And you know what, man, I'm going to pull up the highlights from Jalen Brooks, if y'all will bear with me for a second. But Chris, the kid can play, man. I mean, I know there's a jump from going from Wingate to South Carolina to SEC ball. That's a given. We know that. But if you can play, you can play. And we see guys in the NFL draft every single year that are late bloomers, that have fallen completely under the radar. And these aren't just your 3-star guys that a school likes and ends up being better than the recruiting process says. These are your kids that literally just, in a lot of cases, athletically didn't develop, I think, until senior year of high school and got left out, or sometimes even later. There's always stories in the NFL draft about someone coming from, an FCS school or Division II school and just blowing up. Now, I'm not going to sit here and say Jalen Brooks is going to get drafted in the 3rd round of the 2022 NFL draft. But when I watch this film, which I'm about to turn on right now for everybody, I see a guy who has SEC size. He's 6'3". He's listed 6'3", 197. He told me he's up to 200 pounds. He runs. He said he's been timed at a 4.45, I think he told me, which means even if you're being timed with the most courteous clock operator ever, that means you're at least probably a 4.6 guy on a laser, potentially at that size. And yes, it's going to be a jump up. But given the need at receiver, I see someone who potentially steps in and helps this team if he's deemed eligible by the NCAA, which, as we know, you might as well shake a magic 8 ball and guess. But if he's eligible by NCAA standards this year, then I say the kid can help this. Does that mean he's the number one receiver necessarily? Probably not. But in my opinion, he gets in the rotation for South Carolina this year.
Well, Jalen Brooks should switch positions and say he's a quarterback, and then the NCAA will approve his waiver. They seem to be the only ones that get. But no, seriously, he's a guy that and heck, man, Wingate. Again, we're not going to even pretend that the competition level is even close. But this clip right here, I think, is against Lenore Ryan. Lenore Ryan had a kid named Kyle Duggar that was drafted 37th overall, like second round. I think the Patriots took him. And so anyway, so you could find small school guys like that. But this is a guy who was a later bloomer. And he certainly did some good things. When you look at him, he's got legit size. He's long. He can run. Okay. And so when you look at South Carolina's receiver room, again, this would be, I think, a really good thing if he can become eligible, because at the very minimum, he's going to be able to provide them some competition. And he's a guy that I think athletically could see the field for them. We know he's a really hard worker. So I think that scheme wise, he'll be able to pick some things up, but he can run by some guys. And his speed, I think, will translate pretty well, even to the SEC level.
Oh, man, this play right here, dude. Watch the little, what is this, a slant and go? Yeah. Oh, man.
Yeah.
So let's try to make a comparison here, man, because, all right, yeah, this is tape at Wingate. But, I mean, athletically, the guys that are trying to cover him are playing in college. So, they're not worse than the high school defensive backs he'd be facing night in, night out if we were watching high school film, So, I don't know. So I texted a former South Carolina player, actually, and asked him, for an evaluation. And he said, look, man, the tape is good. He said, the question is, obviously there's a huge separation between him and these defensive backs when he's running these fly routes down the field.
Yep.
The separation will get much smaller in the SEC. The windows to operate in, inside zones and when you're getting covered in man coverage also, those windows are going to shrink. The strength of the defensive backs trying to, press him at the line, these are going to be much stronger guys. So the question, which is a question even with the high school guys, with anybody, is how does he adjust to those smaller windows, faster guys, stronger guys putting their hands on him type thing.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, are there questions? Obviously, but for a 6'3" kid, he can absolutely run, Chris. And again, if Shai is the guy, if Xavier Legette is the number 2, can Jalen Brooks be the third option? I don't think that's far-fetched. You're not asking him to come in and be a number 1 receiver in the SEC. It gives you another option, I think, is the big thing here. And, I think something I've heard is that, to sort of tie it in with this quarterback battle, something South Carolina I don't think did a great job with last year was the deep ball, getting guys open down the field, hitting the deep ball. You see a lot of Jalen Brooks showing good ball skills down the field. I think Colin Hill is someone that I've heard can throw the deep ball to where, if he's the guy, that's a part of it, or it forces Helinski to, get better in that aspect. So stretching the field a bit, I think this is someone that can do that and maybe upgrades the athleticism. And here's the final part of it for me, Chris. I know we've gone long on him, but if you're going to miss, in other words, if you're going to take a chance on someone, I always say 2 things. If you're going to miss with speed, and definitely if you're going to miss with a workout warrior. And so if you're going to take a chance, I'll take a chance on the guy that says I'm not going to be outworked, because if there's some baseline talent there, which like we said, we're talking about 6'3", 4'5", 40. If there is some baseline ability there, the guys that really just work generally find a way to help your football program, right? Like it may not be that he's the number one receiver, but those guys generally find a way to make you better.
Yeah, and that's what it's all about for them this year is it's getting better and getting better right now, and so hey, we'll have to figure out if they can get better right now because there's two aspects to it. Can he help? But number one, even before that, it's can he be eligible, right? And if he's not, that'd be unfortunate for both parties this year. But he's still someone that could, still practice and still work out and do things and could help them out more long term. But look, this is a situation where, again, I'll go back to what we said about recruiting earlier, or what we said about Doty earlier. If this is a deal where South Carolina was too deep with a bunch of seniors who've, had illustrious careers on both sides, we wouldn't be having this conversation, but that's not where they're at right now, and it's a whole separate thing as to why, but they're in a situation where they need some help at receiver, short and long term. And so if you have an opportunity to get a guy who may become eligible, which I would think he'll have a pretty good shot, but we'll have to see, then you got to look at that and say, hey, take some help there. And so I look at this kid and I agree with you. You don't look at him and say, well, he can't run, or anything like that. If you take a receiver that can't run, he better be really special in a lot of other areas. But this guy, he can run. He's got size and he can run. And so I think there's some intrigue there. And I think that they could, develop him pretty well. Joe Cox and Mike Bobo did some good things certainly last season at Colorado State on that front and developing some guys at the receiver position. So be interested to see what they can do, with Jalen Brooks.
Yeah, I think it'll be fun to see, man. And judging by the deal with Nick Muse last year, he'll get, I guess, approved to play 1 hour before South Carolina's second game of the season. So that will that's how it tends to play out with the NCAA. We'll be sending texts all week leading up to the first game of the year. There will be some confidence that he'll get approved. Then it won't happen. And then next week, we'll find out on like Friday night. And there'll be a couple of people that will prematurely report that he's been approved, but it won't really be true yet. And then finally, he'll dress out against South Carolina's road game at Auburn or whatever it is, and he'll be thrown into the fire like that, I think. So that how it goes in the NCAA?
That was a cynical take, but I think there's some legitimate reasons for your cynicism and skepticism.
Yeah, I mean, tell me I'm wrong. Like we've seen.
Not, no.
Yeah. All right. What have we not hit? What have we not hit, Chris? What have we not hit, guys and gals? Let's see. Oh, we do have one more question here.
Well said it.
We stop at an hour, but I figured, man, we got a lot. There's a lot in that press conference. Kyle McDaniel, do you think that Jordan Burch will start at some point this season? Interesting.
Very.
So one takeaway for me from the deal yesterday that has not really been talked about, JJ Enagbare at Buck some.
That's one I should have mentioned earlier. Yeah. When you said, yeah.
And that, we've maybe talked about that a little bit, that South Carolina could go to some more true, the Buck is basically, a lot of times the Buck lines up as a defensive end anyway. So if you're going to sort of call it where that guy's lined up as a defensive end, you can get away with having more of a true defensive end there and just play two defensive ends, which basically will put, I would say, Chris Enagbare and Aaron Sterling on the field at the same time, right? Opposite of each other. That seems to be something that I don't know if they're leaning to it, but they're certainly looking into. And I think maybe gives you a situation there where it allows them to see, all right, is Brad Johnson ready to step up and be a dude? How quickly is Jordan Burch ready? Because there's two things, and we talked about this when Jordan Burch signed. There's two things at play here. One is that Jordan Burch athletically will probably be the most naturally gifted pass rusher, I would say, from a size, first step, speed, etc. standpoint, on the team. But he's also not only a freshman, but a freshman who, because of the rules there at Hammond, was not able to enroll early, and a freshman that is going from SCISA ball to SEC ball, which there's more and more good players at the SCISA level. Don't get me wrong, but it's still a jump. So, I to answer the question, if you sort of make me answer, I'm going to say at some point along the way, yes, he may start a game, but I also wouldn't be surprised if he played maybe a role, not a similar role, but a similar amount of snaps to like a Zach Pickens last year, where you're rotating him in, getting him comfortable, maybe putting him on special teams some, and just letting him get acclimated with the size, the speed of the SEC level. And then, maybe next year he slides into more of a starting role. But I think it's an intriguing question. Muschamp did Muschamp's very clearly high on the defensive guys that they signed last year. He mentioned Birch, he mentioned Boogie Huntley, mentioned Micaiah Scott, mentioned all those guys. But Birch and Huntley are two kids that I've heard mentioned to me as well as impressing so far. So some of this stuff just depends on how other things play out. Injuries, scheme. Is there an injury at another position that forces Enigbare back to his sort of full-time defensive end spot? How well has Brad Johnson improved? And, is there an injury to somebody else at the Buck? Is Jordan Birch himself healthy? There's so many questions here. But I would lean towards him making an impact this year. But it's still a question for me just how big of an impact that is.
There are a lot of questions. And I'll tell you that the Enigbare thing created even more questions as it pertains to Jordan Birch as far as, snaps and potential for starting spot. But I would lean towards just saying he plays that Pickens type role where, and I can't remember off the top of my head if Pickens started a game. I don't think he did. But especially with, the season's cut short even, so there's not 12 opportunities. There's 10 opportunities now to go start a game. I'd just lean towards he doesn't start, but he plays. That's just what I would go with right now. That's without the benefit of them going through preseason camp, where we're going to learn a lot about how each individual guy's progressing, how the team's progressing. But I do think he's going to be in position to probably play and help some this year, like you said, Wes.
Yep. So should be fun to watch. Should be fun to see how that plays out. All right, guys, we got time for one more question. We'll hit it. Can you talk a little about the defense, and can it be a game changer for us this year in those tight games? What position is the biggest strength on the defense, in your opinion? From Shane. Ooh, a lot to unpack there, Shane. I think defense as a whole, I've said this before, the more we've talked on these chats and on our podcast and everything else, Chris, I'm kind of high on the defense. I think there's a lot of potential here. Are there still questions? Yes, but if everybody's healthy, I think the defense has a chance to surprise this year. As far as what position is the biggest strength, I don't know, because I think on every level of the defense, be it the front, the linebackers, or the secondary, there's reason for optimism, but then there's still a few questions. I would say if you want me to sort of dial it down to a strength, I would say the cornerbacks in particular, and then I would say the interior linemen. I think there's talent there. They obviously lose Javon Kinlaw, but there's a lot of depth. Muschamp talked about that. He seems high on Keir Thomas being able to be in the rotation inside as opposed to outside, which is something we had wondered about, I guess, in our conversations. We know it's going to be J.C. Horn, but is it Izzy Mukuamu opposite him, or is Mukuamu at safety? Muschamp mentioned Cam Smith and Johnny Dixon, two guys that we've said are going to have to be really good, or that would help if they're ready to be really good, I should say. So I think, like I said, every single level of the defense, there's some positives and then a couple of questions. But I would say cornerback, and then I would say interior defensive lineman, and the depth they have there, the ability to rotate guys in and out, to me, are the strengths. as far as can it be a game changer? I don't know. It depends on your definition. What do you think, Chris, is a realistic, like if we were going to rank the defenses in the SEC, what do you think is like a realistic way to sort of, I guess, talk about this defense or expectation for this defense? Is middle of the pack where you have them? Do you think they're slightly better than that? Or how would you sort of handicap it?
I would say they got potential to be a little better than middle of the pack. I don't think they're going to be the top 1, 2, or 3, but they've got that potential. I think there's some questions that need to get sorted out. I sort of like the linebacking core, or I like a lot, several different spots, but I still got questions about the secondary as far as who plays where once we know that, I think I could formulate a better opinion on that. And then obviously the defensive line, I like a lot of the pieces on there, but I want to see where they're all fitting in. And then how, a couple questions like how are Sandage and Pickens progressing, for instance. I think they're two more talented guys probably on the entire team, but are they progressing to where they can really take that step forward? But I think that's probably where they're at. I mean, I think I really like one of the corner spots with JC Horn. Obviously, Israel McCormick did some good things at different points last year, especially in the Georgia game. He had an outstanding performance there, but could he even help more at safety? But then that frees up another corner spot. So I do think there's still some key questions. I don't think it's going to be a dominant defense. I think they've got a chance to be really good, especially in certain matchups and in certain games. But again, health is going to certainly play into that. But they got some important questions, I think, to sort out before then.
Well, I think, Chris, it also goes back to your offense and your defense are married together.
Yeah.
So what's the offense going to look like, both from a production standpoint and a schematic standpoint? That's something. How many times last year did the offense put the defense in a bad spot? And how many times last year did the offense put the defense right back on the field? I think these are important questions. If we're going to talk about the expectations for the defense, I think it's not just how well do they play, but it's can the offense at the very least possess the ball a little bit more. That goes back to running the football a little bit more, I think, getting all the running backs involved, or at least a couple of the running backs involved. And, I think, we haven't talked about Zaquandre White at all today. I think not in, great detail. I think that's a huge addition to this team. I think having him added to the bunch, and by the way, I'm gonna self-promote the highlight package that I put together of Zaquandre White, but I think he's a dynamic guy, man, and just adding another element to the offense, adding another playmaker, adding someone who can make some things happen for you, helps all the way around, because your offense and your defense are tied together. And last year, too many times we're seeing an offense that put the defense in a terrible spot, Chris.
Yeah, and you go back. I mean, the best example to me, man, is the Texas A&M game. You look at the score, and you would say, the defense didn't play very well. They gave up 30-something points. Played well early in the game. They tired out. I mean, A&M was on the field constantly. South Carolina was hardly on the field on offense. I mean, they went 3 and out almost the entire game. And so, what you said with working hand in hand is a great analogy. I mean, that under Muschamp, the defense has kept them in a lot of games, and so they've. Statistically, they'll look better if the offense plays better, and they'll play better, if they can get off the field some, but the offense has got to help them a lot with that. And that's a question in and of itself, just how much better those guys can be in third down situations and field position and actually putting points on the board. Those things are all key to the defense. It's not just about how good the defense is. The way that offenses are now, you can't expect, and any defensive coach or head coach will tell you this, the bar of, hey, we want to keep it to this many points per game. A realistic expectation now is you raise that, just because of how offenses are more dynamic now. The game goes faster. There's just a lot to consider, and so it's very important to be good in the other phases of the game to help your defense out.
Yeah, like I said, man, I'm gonna self-promote my Zaquandre White highlights that I posted. if you want to see them all, you're already on our YouTube. So after this is over in a second, go check them out. But man, this kid, Chris, runs way more physicality and aggression and ability to break tackles than I suspected. If you watch his high school tape, and apologize for the quality on some of these, it's JUCO. That's, you do what you can basically. But in high school, he was more of a speed guy, I feel like, whereas he did get bigger. He still has great feet. The cutting ability is off the charts, I think. He runs to daylight. But, dude, he drags tacklers, which is something I did not necessarily expect going in.
Yeah, I mean, from what we saw in high school and even what we heard when South Carolina started recruiting him, we heard a lot about how he's a speed guy who you want to get outside on the edge. And that's still true. But when I watched the tape that you put together, you still see those things. You see that cutting ability in the hole, the ability to make the initial tackler miss on the edge or even in the box. But he is a tougher, he's a little bit bigger, than I thought. Certainly he is bigger than he was in high school. He put on some good weight and more powerful. So I think that's certainly a positive for him and for South Carolina.
Yep. So like I said, go check that out. That is on Gamecock Central YouTube. All right, folks, I think that's going to do it for today. Hope you have enjoyed the show. Appreciate those of you who joined in and those who joined the chat. Please, if you can do me a favor, hit the little subscribe button right there on the right-hand side of the video. And obviously that's absolutely free. You're just subscribing to our YouTube. And I believe there's a way, Chris, I'm going to put you on the spot. Do you know there's a way for them to change a setting where they can get an alert, I think, when we go live? Does just subscribing do that? Or
so, to get an alert, you want to turn on your notifications. And so to do that, let me see if I could sort of replicate it. There's some bell or something. Oh, okay. So if you're watching right now, you'll see under the video, you can like it, you can dislike it. Please don't do that. You can share it. And then there's a button where it'll either say subscribe or subscribe. Right to the right of that is something that looks like a bell. If you click on that, you'll get notified when we go live or when we drop a new video on our channel.
Okay. All right. So everybody here right now, all at once, we're having a group activity. If you're watching on a desktop or laptop or whatever, I don't know if you can do it if you're on mobile or not. So everyone all at once, click the subscribe button. Okay. Now hit the bell. Thank you. I just saw them all go up. 28 new bells. And for Chris, I'm Wes Mitchell. Thanks for joining us. We enjoyed it. Thanks for the chats. And Tyler Ballou says that, Chris, he appreciates you with your background because he stole it and is using it himself. So you are welcome, Tyler. And guys, gals, we appreciate it as always. Next week, we'll be back on. So we'll see you then. Everybody have a great week, great weekend. And come see us on GamecockCentral.com.